All right, welcome everyone. Where the Book of Mormon come from, part 17. I mentioned our last video that it might be the final one, but this is maybe the final one. We'll see. Can't make any promises because there's just so much that we to talk about in regards to this subject, and I thought I would give some more evidence on the Spalding reading theory and showing the internal evidence, and so that's what we're going to really dive into. What I really kind of like to do is reconstruct the Book of Mormon back to its very foundation from which it came, which would be Solomon Spalding's book, Manuscript Found. And I like to basically be like a detective and use every skill possible in trying to do that. And so you'll remember that we mentioned all these witnesses here that have been taken down their statements, in which we went over this several videos ago. But you can see them here on the screen, and we're going to go through them. But you can see how each of these would fit of the description of manuscript found and how it be transformed into the Book of Mormon. So we think about the mark on the foreheads, which was mentioned by Joseph Miller and Reddick McKee, and I think Matilda, the adoptive daughter of Solomon Spalding. So if you kind of think of it this way, it's found in Alma Chapter 3, verses 1 through 25, but I think mainly verses 1 through 5, if I remember correctly. So that's where that would be found. Then there's the judgment upon the old world, which Oliver Smith referred to, in which definitely, as First Nephi 1:13 talks about. Go ahead and read that. So it says, and he read, saying, Woe, woe unto Jerusalem, for I have seen thy abominations, yea, and many things that my father read concerning Jerusalem, that it should be destroyed, and the inhabitants thereof, many should perish by the sword, many should be carried away captive into Babylon. So definitely, that is also Spalding. And then there's, next looking at the journey from Jerusalem, in which several witnesses stated that, and that's found in First Nephi 2. It's also, they make several trips between Jerusalem and the place in the wilderness. So that's Spalding. We're proposing that. We're putting that peg in and saying this is Spalding material. Then there's the account of Laban, which Henry Lake mentioned, which is actually found in First Nephi 3 through 7. So as you can see, it's very interesting how we start to formulate where manuscript found and what Solomon Spalding wrote. I Nephi, mentioned by Artemis Cunningham. And what's really interesting is that phrase is used 60 times in First Nephi, and it's used 23 times in Second Nephi. Now, I'm going to propose to you that Second Nephi is totally written by Rigdon. But First Nephi, we can see why it would be the case, because it's used so frequently, why that detail would stick in Artemis Cunningham's mind. And then we have the humorous passages. So you can see here, for example, Ether 2 on my right, just right above my head. We have the holes in the barges and plugging those in and out. And then you got also Ether 15, where the man is decapitated, and yet he struggles for breath after his head is cut off. So to me, that was probably Spalding's signature move as well. And then we have several things here like Nephi, Lehi, Mormon, Moroni, which some of the main characters are names that are mentioned by several witnesses. Quarrels, contentions, mentioned by the John and Martha Spalding. Separating into two nations, Lamanites and Nephites, bloody wars, forts and mounds, a record hidden in the earth. The record hidden in the earth, I remember, was Abner Jackson. And so I put this on the very top, in which that covers a lot of places like Mosiah, Alma, and Helaman. So just let y'all know about that, especially like, for example, Alma 43 through 63, and the book called Mormon, and the record hidden in the earth, Mormon 8:14. Going a little bit further, the arts and was known as a historical novel. First Settlers of America, Descendants of American Indians, and Arts and Sciences. And And you can see how in the Book of Mormon it depicts them as, so to speak, going to become the American Indians because of the red mark on their foreheads and the way they dressed and stuff of that nature. And then there's the arts and sciences. I think maybe one example of this is in, if I remember right, Alma Chapter 11, where it mentions this monetary system. It's very interesting there. So I think that's part of it. So that'd be Alma Chapter 11. So it would be, I wish I would have put that there, but Alma Chapter 11, of course, right in that area right here. All right, and then no religious matter. And what is meant by this is no scriptures, no theological material. And that's very interesting because that makes sense if it was stolen by Sidney Rigdon, who added the theological material to it. And which you can see here. I did a whole study on, I used some of the Tanner's material and other material, but I also went through the Book of Mormon myself and just noted where these verses are taken from. And I want to remind everyone that a lot of these, if not most of 98%, if I haven't done the math on that, but 98% is like from the New Testament. But even before it was written down, is what's interesting. Now you got to kind of look before Third Nephi. And that's what I mean by before the New Testament was written down. And then we got other passages here. What I like to do, so for example, First Nephi mentions the 2 chapters of Isaiah, and there's 63 verses that are covered. And then Second Nephi, look at there, you can see what it's all covered in that. And there'd be 13 chapters of Isaiah, which is a lot of filler material, I would say, and 74 verses. Then we have the book of Jacob, you can see there, and that'd be 19. It's 19 pages long, and it contains about 30 verses from the Bible. Then we got Enos, Jerome, Omni, Words of Mormon, and so Enos is 3 pages long, has about 9 verses. Then you can see Jerome and Omni and Words of Mormon, and that would be Jerome would be 2 pages and only with 1 verse, and Omni 3 pages with 2 verses, and the Words of Mormon 2 pages. It's 2 pages long and about 2 verses occur from the Bible. And then look at Mosiah. And Mosiah has 1 chapter of Isaiah in it, 64 pages long, and it contains about 90 verses. Alma, so you can see Alma's biggest book. It's 162 pages long. It has about 234 verses contained. Helaman, so you can see there, Helaman's about 39 pages long with 51 verses. We have Third Nephi, and that would be 59 pages long with 3 chapters of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, and about 51 verses. Fourth Nephi, 4 pages long with about 7 verses. Fourth Mormon, as you can see here. So Mormon would be 19 pages with 42 verses. Ether is 31 pages long, 40 verses. Moroni, 14 pages long with 47 verses. So you can see kind of an idea of where Rigdon would have placed this material in. Then there was John Miller. He referred to the Straits of Darien, which, when you plug it into the Google Maps, would be the Strait of Panama. So I found that kind of interesting. In which, if you look here in Ether 10 verse 20, there's that narrow neck of land mentioned. And there's how it was written in the old obsolete style, which Elizabethan English or King James type English, and it came to pass. And That's mentioned by Henry Lake, I remember. And so you can see here, look at the came to pass. It's found 202 times in First Nephi, and I'm using the 1830 edition. The green part, so you're going to see a dark green and a light green. Dark green means there's a lot of came to pass phrases, and light greens not several, and then the black ones, of course, represent nothing. So chapter 20 and 21 is where I believe the Isaiah chapters are located. If we get then we 202 times. Then we go to Second Nephi. Interesting enough, 17 times. And this is one of the reasons why I think Sidney Rigdon is a part of it. Now, I want to let everyone know that a lot of those chapters there are from the Bible. So we want to make certain of that. And also, one thing we need to recognize is that came to pass is normally used in a narrative, and Second Nephi doesn't contain a lot of narrative if you'll read it. So 17 times there. And then in Jacob, it's 47 times, Jerome 6 times, Enos 4 times, Omni 13 times, and the words of Mormon 5 times. And then if you go a little bit further, came to pass 163 times in Mosiah. So you can see there in the darker spots, like 18 through 27 and 29. And then there's the book of Alma. Now here, the blanks just mean 0 times. So you kind of get an idea of the dark spots there, dark green of where it's used. And then there's Helaman. So it's used 120 times there. And then third Nephi, 128 times is found. I happen to think that Sidney Rigdon is responsible for third Nephi, as just my hypothesis. Fourth Nephi is 20 times, found 20 times. Then there's Mormon, 60 times. And then there's Ether, 165 times. And then there's Moroni, interesting enough, 0 times. But I have to remind everyone it's not a narrative. It is a theological handbook, but I do think Rigdon is responsible for this whole book here, too. Now, another thing to think about is the redactions. So I kind of pointed this out in the last video, so I won't try to. So just bear with me a little bit. But so January 1823 at least, because if we follow John Winter's testimony, we know that Spalding had shown him the manuscript, and evidently he had not edited it at all. Now, of course, I'm making that a hypothesis there, and that was sometime in 1822. So it had to be after that, and in the autumn of 1826, because we know in Bainbridge, Ohio, there's Dempsey Thompson, and there's the niece of Sidney Rigdon who mentioned about this manuscript. And then there's when the 116 pages got lost, then of course Rigdon had to rework it, in which he would introduce theological truths into it that he learned from July to December of 1828. And then possibly in the summer of 1829, he also would help because some of his whereabouts during that time period are unknown. See the last video. So the original Spalding book, I want to read this because it's very important. Mormon, the last. So if we were to pick what the original outline of it would be that Mormon, the last prophet of the Nephite people, would pass away around 400 AD. You can see that scriptures there if you want to read those. He composed an abridgment of the history of his nation from the first year of the reign of King Zedekiah all the way to 1,000 years later to their extinction. When Nephi, the son of Lehi, came forth from Jerusalem in the first year, so we're going now all the way even back to the first Nephi, very first book. When Nephi, the son of Lehi, came forth from Jerusalem the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, he commenced to keep the annals of his people by means of engravings upon certain plates which he had made with his own hands. See chapter 1, verse 17. No matter who might write on these plates in the generations after the death of Nephi or into whose hands they were delivered for preservation, they were always known as the plates of Nephi. And you can check those scriptures there. The title page of the Book of Mormon therefore indicates that it is an account written by the hand of the prophet upon plates that he had constructed with his own hands, and that the historical material included in the abridgment which he composed was taken from the plates of Nephi. In the present form under which Rigdon turned the volume over to Smith, there was something else besides an account written by the hand of Mormon. In fact, the account written by the hand of Mormon is not reached until the reader comes to about page 158 or so, somewhere in that vicinity, depending on what edition you're reading. The books included in the small plates are so Nephi, he not only made large plates, but he made some smaller plates. And so those books included 1st, 2nd Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerome, and Omni. And after the prophet Nephi had been engaged for some length of time in the laboring of engraving his records upon the plates of Nephi, he is represented to have obtained a command from the Lord to make certain other plates be kept separate from the plates of Nephi. And so you can read that in 2nd Nephi 5:30 and 1st Nephi 19, verse 2. The second lot of plates is first called the small plates at Jacob 1:1, but further on that designation becomes usual. It is distinctly recognized that they were made by the hand of Nephi. At the close of the book of Omni, these small plates are said to be full, and that's kind of interesting. So here they are, the small plates are being done, and all of a sudden when you get to Omni, which is right at the beginning, close to the beginning of Mosiah, the plates get full. How convenient. They extend no farther than the verse just now cited. They were then delivered into the charge of King Benjamin and were transmitted from hand to hand until in the 4th century A.D. After Christ, they were discovered by the prophet Mormon, so happens, in the course of a search among the archives of his people. I did get these notes, I believe, from and I would advise you to read it. It's called The Real Founder of Mormonism, Sidney Rigdon by Mr. Whitsitt. Although Mormon had already completed and engraved an abridgment made by himself of the events that had transpired as far as the reign of this King Benjamin, he was so much pleased with the contents of these small plates that he laid aside this section of his abridgment. Now, which was never heard of anymore, but I found an exception to that in 3rd Nephi. I mentioned that in the last video. I think it's 3rd Nephi. Look real quick here. Well, where is? Well, just go during to the last video and you'll find it there. As I could tell you. He says, "Wherefore I choose these things, small plates, to finish my record upon them, which remainder of my record I shall take from the plates of Nephi," chapter 1, verse 5 of Words of Mormon, just as he had previously done in the case of that portion of his abridgment which he was now rejected. Now, what motive was in operation to induce Mormon to reject so much of his own abridgment in favor of these small plates of Nephi? So you see here, you can imagine, here in Mormon, he's making his abridgment. And then he finally gets, he's searching through the archives, and he just happens to find these other small plates that happen to be the same time period as the reign of King Benjamin. And so what motive is done? Well, he says it was done for the reason that these small plates pleased him because of the prophecies concerning the coming of Christ. And accordingly, Nephi refers to the circumstances that a more history part are written upon my under the plates, meaning the large plates of Nephi. So, what's going on here? Well, Rigdon returned to the text of Spalding, only inserting here and there larger or shorter religious portions set down on separate sheets of paper for the purpose of imparting a religious character to the story. This is before the 116 pages lost. According to the Words of Mormon, were transferred from the preface to a position in front of the Book of Mosiah, where Mormon was first allowed to be heard from, and must have been altered by Rigdon to suit the altered plan which he conceived and employed in the altered place they occupied. So, what are we trying to say here? So, what we're trying to say is this, basically. Rigdon, when he first gave the manuscript over that he edited, Spalding, it was sprinkling with, of course, his own Baptist views and of theology and stuff of that nature that you can see throughout the Book of Mormon. Then the 116 pages happened. The loss of the 116 pages happened. So Reagan had to conceive a plan where he could explain, because there was this. Well, what if the enemies showed up with the pages that they had stolen and they compared it to the newer translation they made? They would say, "Oh, you're a fraud because it's not the same translation." So this way, Rigdon came up with this so that he could say, "No, no, no, that's the large plates of Nephi. This is the small plates of Nephi that we now translated from." You see what I'm saying? So that's why they had to conceive this idea of where Mormon would find the small plates, and he would add them to his abridgment. So let's be reminded of that loss of 116 pages that occurred in June of 1828. Now, did it destroy spotted material? Oh, yeah, it probably did. I would say yes. But did it destroy all of it? I would say no, it did not. So I'm kind of trying to give you an idea here of where it got destroyed, the loss of the 116 pages. Now, I don't think First Nephi 3 through 7 were destroyed. And I do that based on the previous video we talked about, where so Henry Lake, he read the account of Laban, and he read about an inconsistency, in which that inconsistency is still found in the Book of Mormon. All right, so we think about all these 20 details. Is there a place in the Book of Mormon where we can find most of these details? And I think, yes, you can. Here's the interesting thing here, and I want to point this out to you. Remember how I said Alma is the largest book in the Book of Mormon? Well, you can see here, and I got an arrow pointing to it. But do you see chapter? So I was talking about mainly chapter 43 through 63. Now, so you see there, 43 through 63. Notice through 20 chapters just how many verses are found, right? Now, I will point out that there are some verses taken from the Bible, like Galatians 5 verse 1. Stand fast in the liberty in which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again in the yoke of bondage. But you got to keep thinking of this perspective when they're having this war and they're fighting for freedom, how that would link back to Solomon Spaulding, who was an American Revolutionary War veteran. So it makes sense why he would put that in. So there's wars and contentions, Nephites versus Lamanites, freedom and the liberty theme, right? So it's almost pure Spaulding text when you look at chapter 43 through 63 and Helaman 1 through 4. The red part's going to represent mostly Spaulding's material. The blue is going to represent Rigdon's edited material. Although, I mean, Rigdon's edits are sprinkled throughout some of the red chapters even, but just trying to give you an idea. Interesting enough, through chapter 36 through 42, you have a copy of Saul of Tarsus's conversion, and Alma, he's a copycat of that. So I'm sure that's partly Rigdon. If you look at Alma 38, verse 9. Alma 38, verse 9. So Alma 38, verse 9 says, "And now, my son, I have told you that that you may learn wisdom, that you may learn of me. There is no other way or means whereby man can be saved, only through Christ. Behold, he is the life and the light of the world. Behold, he is the word of truth and righteousness." I mean, definitely taken from the Gospel of John. And this was supposedly written in 70 years before Christ was born. And then there's a long sermon on resurrection and other theological themes found throughout those 6 chapters. Alma 35, you read it, Zoramites, Lamanites, and the people of Ammon. So I would say that it is Spaulding's text. Chapter 32 through 34, Sermon on the Seed. Check out chapter 33, verse 19. 33 verse 19. Behold, he was spoken of by Moses, yea, and behold, a type was raised up in the wilderness, that whoever would look upon it might live, and many did look and live. Definitely John 3:14 and 15. And look at verse in chapter uh, I don't know why I put 35 sermons, so forgive me for that. Then chapter 31, Alma 30 narrative at the beginning. So if you want to look there, narrative at the beginning. But there was definitely some editing by Rigdon in regards to that. All right, go a little bit further. Chapter Alma 29 and 30, sermon, some of the scripture references, like the word Christ. I mean, this is written in a Reformed Egyptian, it said, but Christ is a Greek title. It's the equivalent to the Hebrew Meshiach, Messiah. So something for us to think about there. And then Alma 28, 27 is historical, standard historical narrative. So I would say that Spalding would be behind that. 26 is a sermon, so I think Rigdon was edited that in. Chapter 16 through 25, a standard historical narrative. Chapter 12 through 15, Alma 13, definitely you can see Hebrews 7, so edited by Rigdon there. Alma 12 is influenced by Hebrews chapter 9, so that's why I think Rigdon is behind that. Alma chapter 11, like I said, is that arts and sciences has a detail mentioned, and that's like monetary coin system. So definitely, I believe Spalding would be behind that. Chapter 4 through 10, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, is mentioned several times. That's 70 years before Christ was even born. And I mean, when Jesus and John the Baptist said it, it would only be from their time when they said it 3.5 years, which makes a lot more sense. And then we got, errors like Jesus being born in Jerusalem. That prophecy is not true. So we still see that even if this theory is not right, the Book of Mormon is still false because it contains contradictions like this. Uses phrases like redeeming love and the Good Shepherd. I think definitely that Rigdon is behind that. Now, Alma 1 through 3, you remember the mark on the foreheads mentioned by the witnesses, so definitely is Spalding material there. Chapter 27 through 29. So you could kind of get and see there about where I think mostly where the edits are made by Rigdon, and where the original Spalding material is. I want to skip just a little bit forward to Helaman. So Helaman 1 through 4 definitely is Spalding. Chapter 5 is Helaman. Go ahead and go there to Helaman chapter 5. Yeah, like it contains that repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That was in 30 years before Christ was born. There's Helaman chapter 6, which I think if you look at that carefully, it is most Spalding mostly. Uh, Especially Helaman 12 through 16. Read that, and I think you can see that was additions made by Rigdon. Then I believe 3rd Nephi 1 through 29. Definitely Rigdon stands behind that. And then there's 4th Nephi. Definitely made by Rigdon because it refers to communal living and stuff of that nature. There's Mormon 1 through 4, I think, and chapter 5. Go to Mormon chapter 5 for a moment. Yeah, definitely. You can kind of see chapter 5, especially verse 8 through the end of the chapter. Chapter 6, because we know, it talks about the last days of Mormon and how he's going to hide the record hidden in the earth. So definitely, I would think that this is, um, except of course, some of chapter 7 seems to be Rigdon. So, like I said, you gotta kind of just look at it very closely. Um, Definitely Mormon 8.5 through chapter 9, because he refers to miracles and stuff of that nature, which was very unique. For Rigdon, that was something that he believed was continuous miracles. And then we got Ether, chapter 1 and 2, definitely, I believe, referring to Spalding. And then chapter 3 through 5, especially if you look at, especially chapter 4 and 5, I think you can see that, because it mentions the baptism for the remission of sins, which contradicts, right? Rigdon's former belief was, you're saved before baptism. But he learned the truth from Walter Scott. But Walter Scott, where did he get it from? He got it from the Bible. Acts 2:38 teaches that, and so he wanted to incorporate these new theological beliefs into that, in which that's found in chapter 4. Then, if you look at, it's very interesting when you read chapter 6 or 11. Definitely, Spalding, and it's interesting to me, like Ether chapter 8. Notice how I think Spalding may have tried to, he got some inspiration from some biblical passages like John the Baptist being beheaded in Ether 8. Then there's chapter 12 and 13, I think is Rigdon. And chapter 13 through 16 is Spalding. Now, remember, there is this loss of 116 pages. So what I believe survived that is 1 Nephi 1 through 7 mostly, and 16 through 18. Now, 1 Nephi chapter 6 is definitely Rigdon, because he had to come up with that idea of the small plates. So you can see here where he has to get back to the reign of King Benjamin, which is toward the beginning of Mosiah. So, chapter 6 and through 15 definitely is Rigdon's fingerprints, because it has a lot to do with supposed prophecies of the coming of future of America, and corruption of the scriptures is what he will assert, and things of that nature. 16 through 18, though, definitely Spalding's that material that survived. 19 through 22 definitely has Rigdon behind that. Then 2 Nephi 1 through 33, definitely Rigdon. Filler material of Isaiah, the building, having priests from an unauthorized tribe, building a temple like Solomon using only a small population size. I mean, it required hundreds of thousands of workers. It took 7.5 years to build the Temple of Solomon. So it just seems very improbable. And it mentions baptism for remission of sins, and those additions like chapters 30 through 33. And you got Jacob 1 through 7. You got that long parable that mixes up um, the parable of the fig tree and Romans 11 and so forth. And then you got Jerome, Enos, Jerome, Omni, Words of Mormon, finally connecting to the book of Mosiah. What's very interesting is Mosiah and you got to read a paper called When Words Collide. It's an article written by Latter-day Saints. Very interesting. When pages collide. So also, of course, what um, what Rigdon did before he did this replacement, he had also, I believe, written a theological handbook called Moroni, and contains a lot of the beliefs he held to. So to put it all together, stage 1, this is probably what it mostly looked like. There's the edited manuscript given to Smith uh, prior to September of 1827. You can kind of see here. Now we have some unknowns because that's the pages that were lost from Nephi and Lehi to the reign of King Benjamin near the beginning of Mosiah. But this is probably what it mostly looked at the first. And then stage 2, the loss of 116 pages in June 1828. So Rigdon can now introduce some new truths he learned through 3rd Nephi from Moroni, but also from 1st Nephi through Book of Mosiah. So you'll see he obviously that box there you can see from 3rd Nephi all the way to Ether and of course Moroni. Now either he took all of the whole manuscript with him, and that's possible. But I guess he decided not to add anything to Mosiah and Alma and Helaman. I guess he thought, man, I don't want to have to edit those. So he decided, I guess, to edit 3rd Nephi, 4th Nephi, Mormon, and Ether, and Moroni, and include those new truths he learned. Then, stage 4, Rigdon must complete the replacement of the 116 pages leading up to the reign of King Benjamin. In the long way, he puts in new theological truths he learned, like in 2nd Nephi, for example. And thus, you have the whole Book of Mormon. That's the evolution of it. If we were to think about, and this is not a, this is Spalding, this is Rigdon. I think about if it is Spalding, the clues would be the names of cities and of characters, and yeah, it is influenced by the Bible, like Galatians 5 verse 1, and also using Bible stories like Judges 20, I think, in Mosiah, one of the early chapters of Mosiah, and also, like I said, in the book of Ether too. And then claiming to be historical events and using that, and it came to pass, and it came to pass. Now, with regards to Rigdon, and maybe he had help from Cowdery and Smith and others, Pratt, then you're going to have sermon, religious type material, speeches, theological content, heavily influenced by the Bible. Just look at the back at the verses I give. And there's also a key phrase called the children of men, of using that. So that's one of the ways I think that it could help. So once again, especially if you want to use these details as to help you to see the truth on the development from manuscript found into the Book of Mormon. So we've covered, I believe, quite a bit, and like I say before, this I believe to be the best explanation for how the Book of Mormon came to be, how it's not from God. And if you're a Latter-day Saint and you're watching this, I really want you to reach out to me, because I love you and I want you to know the truth. And you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You can become a true disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm just so thankful for this opportunity. I do all this research because there's a lot of false gospels out there, and we gotta be aware of those. We gotta teach people and show people the way. And when there are 55,000 missionaries of the Latter-day Saints going out, and I just think about all the error that's being spread, and I just think about that this is always going to just continue on and on and on, unless we really poke some holes in the narrative and show, listen, this doesn't, even if it's the case, like I said before, even if the story's is not true, there's still, you have to deal with the contradictions. You got to deal with those. And really, if you're honest, you'll say, you know what, this supposed revelation is not consistent with the Bible. And of course, I think everyone would recognize that this is if you read it carefully, you can it claims to be from God, but it also shows forth the evidence that it doesn't show any contradictions. And so, for a book to come along later, 1800 years, 1700 years, one really needs to think about these matters. I really think about the Orson Pratt and what he said. Either if it's true, we must accept it. But if it's false, we must reject it. And if it's false, it will lead you to destruction. So I love people and I want what's best for them. And I want what's best for you. And so I really appreciate you watching through this series. And I thank you very much for your for you giving your time and attention to this.